Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
You're listening to the award-winning Serious Privacy podcast sponsored by TrustArc. Please welcome your hosts, Paul Breitbart, Ralph O'Brien, and Dr. Kay Royal.
We are recording this episode at the end of February, and as you can probably tell, it's okay not to be okay, as we say. And today, it's okay to be without Kay, as we'll all miss, as there's no Kay Royal on the podcast today. So welcome to your weekly roundup of all things data protection and privacy, and we've basically got a number of things that have happened this week, a number of weekly developments. So rather than with any broad theme this week, it looks like a random collection of news stories across the world of AI, EDPS, EDPB, agentic AI, the ICO, the DUAA, the GPA, and other TLAs. That's three-letter abbreviations. So let's just jump straight in, because my name is Ralph O'Brien.
And my name is Paul Breitbart, and welcome to Serious Privacy. Indeed, Kay is on vacation this week. I think her first real vacation in forever. So she's traveling, not able to connect anywhere to the internet. Ralph and I will take care of you this week. And we actually have quite a few things to discuss, indeed, all small things. But let's start with an event that was just behind us, the Winter Olympics. And Ralph, unexpected question, what winter sports would you compete in the Winter Olympics?
Oh, it's just way too cold. I'm quite a fan of the film Cool Runnings. That's quite an amusing film. But no, for me, I actually quite like and please don't anyone who plays this sport be upset with me, the kind of the vague absurdity of curling. There's been a lot of controversy over curling with like double touches on the old as it goes down the slide. But yeah, there's just something vaguely interesting about watching people scrubbing the ice in front of as it goes down that chute. Oh my God, I don't even know the technical terms. This is awful, isn't it? Don't talk about something you don't know about on the podcast. One of the golden rules. That being said, I missed when sort of ski jumping was in as well, just to watch people flying through the air at 90 miles an hour. Not my cup of tea, but I'll take it. Yourself?
Coming from the Netherlands, I should probably compete in skating because that's where we stand a chance to win, whether it's short track or long track. But with 10 gold medals and number 3 in the overall medal classification, I think we've done pretty well. So I think short track would be fun and the speed of it. But the one I was most fascinated by was probably the freestyle skiing big air. Just people on skis going backwards from a ramp and then doing all kinds of moves in the air and then landing on 2 feet or 2 skis. Fascinating. I think I would be way too scared to actually do it. Going down slopes with 90 miles an hour and then 10 meters high in the sky. But yeah, maybe that's something in another life that I would like to try.
From white knuckle skiing to the white knuckle world of data protection, eh?
That must be a bridge to the DUAA bill or the Data Use and Access Act.
You say that. Yeah, I suppose I do need to talk about the Data Use and Access Act. I said this on stage in Bristol a few weeks ago. This is old news now, but as you know, though the Data Use and Access Act in the UK was passed actually last June, we've been waiting for commencement schedules for some time. And I was actually running a training course, and on Monday I was telling people, I've just gone to the website, I check the website most days, and it says early 2026. And that was on the Monday. On the Monday, I went to the website and saw the commencement schedules and said Thursday.
Welcome to China with the PIPL.
Yes, the Data Use and Access Act is here. It is in. And actually, the commitment schedules went live in the UK in early February. So actually, this is very old news now because this will be broadcast pretty much at the start of March. But I have heard it described, and this might amuse you, as a law that's of only of use to bad actors.
Oh my, that doesn't bode well.
Yeah, and what I mean by that, or what I've been told is meant by that, is that actually, to be fair, if you wanted to, you could almost crack on with the law as it was. The Data Use and Access Act does give you a number of exemptions you can use, recognize legitimate interests, there's compatible secondary uses, there's a whole different approach to the Article 22, the automated decision-making. But these are all, and there is a number of different sort of ways that subject access is being dealt with, is being cleaned up. But the biggest changes really to me aren't for controllers. They're actually for the change to the ICO and actually to PECA, because PECA enforcement is being changed.
That's e-privacy for the non-Brits.
E-privacy, yeah, e-privacy for our European listeners. Yeah, so just so people are aware, the Data Use and Access Act actually changes 3 other laws, the UK GDPR, the UK Data Protection Act 2018, and PECA 2003, which is our implementation of e-privacy. Now, the reason I've heard it described as a law that's of main use for bad actors is because you could virtually carry on the way you were. But what it does do is add in a layer of exemption. It adds in a layer of things that you could use if you wanted to frustrate or to make things easier for business, essentially. I think one of the biggest changes for me is the ICO's new mission statement in that, where it now has a statutory duty and it's got a mission statement in 4 parts. Basically, part 1, encourage innovation. Part 2, make life easy for business. Part 3, think of the economy before you do anything. And part 4, think of the children and their special data protection needs.
What about the regular data subject?
Yeah, so once you turn 18, all bets are off, right? So it is a real change with the ICO going to the Information Commission being run by this board. And then essentially, but my message for controllers, I guess, in the UK is don't panic. It does give you new options to use if you want to, but nothing you have to do. And in fact, the only bit of the law that hasn't commenced so far, and is going to commence on June the 19th, 2026, is to have a statutory data protection complaints process. So if someone writes in and makes a complaint, rather than complaining directly to the Independent Supervisory Authority, the ICO in this case, they would now legally have to write to the controller first, and the controller has to acknowledge the complaint within 30 days and then deal with it without undue delay. And only then, once it's gone through the organization's complaint process, can you go to the ICO. So just to think about that imagine you're doing a subject access request. So you put in a subject access request, they haven't responded in a month, they claim the further 2 months, you then want to complain, so you complain, they then have to acknowledge you in 30 days. Then they have to deal with your complaint, and then and only then can you go to the ICO. And the ICO's waiting times are around about 40 weeks at the moment, and they have dispensation and pretty broad ruling to decide even if they want to look at it or not.
So it could be that a year down the line, you hear that the ICO doesn't want to take a look at your case.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to be critical because the ICO is full of good people doing good things, but at the same time, just looking at that sort of frustration of the process. And I think that's what the data use and access brings. Not only does it bring a frustration in the process, but also a number of exemptions that can be claimed. And of course, on nearly every clause now, there's the Secretary of State can add new stuff. Recognized legitimate interests, the Secretary of State can add more. It's compatible secondary purposes, the Secretary of State can add more. Automated decision-making, the Secretary of State can change this.
But if I'm a good faith data controller, I'm not a bad actor, and I've got my data protection compliance program set up under GDPR and the UK GDPR, is there anything that I have to change right now, or can I just continue doing what I've done?
Continue doing what you've done. That's pretty much it. Until the statutory complaints process comes in June, continue doing what you've done.
And that's a minor change in your internal policies, basically. That's also not a massive change you should stop processing personal data in a certain way, or your legal basis have changed, or those kind of things, that all has virtually stayed the same.
It has. There's some interesting clarifications. I think it imposes a little bit more risk. It's interesting. I was talking to a charity the other day about some of the changes to PECA, including the idea of extending the soft opt-in to the charity sector instead of just commercial sales in PECA. And it was really interesting because the charity was first of all, let's do this. Let's just start emailing everybody because we can. And then I said, no, this doesn't apply to historical data because under the soft opt-in rules, you've got to tell people when you collect the data, make sure it's marketing and this, that, and the other. And then it went through the process with them. And this charity kind of said, oh, it's not really worth the bother.
That's with any change, right? It only applies from now on and not for anything you've done before. And that's also still the beef that I have with Meta saying, oh yeah, but we will use all your old pictures to train our AI upon. You cannot, because you don't have the legal basis, because you never told me when you collected those pictures from me that you were going to use them for that purpose.
I think it's interesting because on one hand, I'm thinking, oh, this is just a storm in the teacup. Controllers can carry on doing what they were doing anyway. And if you're an international data controller and you're subject to GDPR in Europe and all of the other things, I think you're going to keep your program largely the same. But then my other head is telling me, there's an awful lot in here that has the potential to be damaging if controllers want to go down that route and utilize all of these exemptions and changes. I find myself a little bit frustrated, I think, in that if you're going to do reform, I almost feel like, why didn't you take the UK GDPR, the Data Protection Act 2018 and PECA and clean the whole thing up rather than just create another layer of track changes, another layer of exemption, another layer of complication and call it simplification?
Talking about simplification, I think that's also the theme that we see in the work program for the EDPB for 2026 and 2027, which was released in mid-February. And there are some interesting things in there. First of all, looking at the guidelines that we can expect, ideally within the time frame of the work program. Although I do notice that once again, they have the guidelines on anonymization put on their work program. And I think it has been the case for the past 4 years already that opinion was there, and we still haven't seen a draft. But more interestingly, we also get guidelines on children's data that have not been announced yet, as far as I'm aware. On consent or pay, that's work in progress. We knew. I'm very excited to see that there will be guidelines on the processing of data for scientific research purposes. I think that's long overdue. Children's data, by the way, as well, especially where it regards the age of consent and how children can consent and how parents can consent. And then we also get final recommendations for user account on e-commerce websites. Those are already in consultation. And interestingly, a possible follow-up on a judgment of the Court of Justice from 2022 on passenger name records. And that's like data retention, a never-ending story, where the member states say we need to collect everything about everybody all of the time. And the court says, no, you cannot, because that's not necessary and not proportionate. So very curious to see what that will bring and what it depends on to see if they will draw something up there. The other thing is that we get more templates from the EDPB, again, hopefully leading to more harmonization across DPAs. For example, a template on data breach notifications. So what does the form need to include? Maybe aligning the data breach form across the European Union and then also allowing for some form of automation. Here's just me hoping. We get standard templates for DPIAs, for legitimate interest assessments, for the records of processing activity, and also for privacy notices. So some really interesting stuff that they will be working on. Most of it, as always, will be subject to consultation. So it's also a really good opportunity for practitioners to share. And that's what should be coming between now and the end of next year, the end of 2027. Yeah, this is mostly good news.
Yeah, it's mostly good news. The template approach I've always worried about slightly because obviously everyone's processing is different. Whilst I perhaps understand it for the ROPA that was always intended to be a more simple document, having templates for privacy notice. The ICO tried to do that over here. There's like a privacy notice generator on their website, which from I tried to use it a couple of times and found out it just wasn't customizable and didn't produce the results I wanted that was A, readable and usable to the right audience, and B, captured the nuance of what an organization does. I've always got mixed feelings on templates. They're a useful guide for people who don't know what they're doing, but for people who do know what they're doing, they perhaps aren't customizable or stretchable enough.
As long as they're going to be used as an example, this is how you could do it, and not enforced as this is how you should do it, then I think it could be a good step. And you just mentioned charities. There are lots of small NGOs who are still struggling with all things data protection. And I think for those kind of organizations, it could be really useful to put something like this in place. But yeah, we'll see what it means in practice and how it will turn out. Can imagine that it's somehow useful.
Yeah, no, please don't think that I don't think it's useful. I totally agree with that. And talking about being useful, somewhat useful. Maybe this one, in fact, isn't somewhat useful. I want to go back to the ICO again. There was an interesting court case, and just to tell you how long ago this court case is, it was about a cyber attack in 2017, 2018. So this court case has actually been tried under the Data Protection Act 1998. So quite an old court case, but the ICO have just won it in the Court of Appeal. So let's just think about the timescale for that. Something that happened between 2017 and 2018 that's actually now been decided upon in 2026 under the previous law. So, quite a one. And this is what's known as DSG versus the... And it's actually a landmark case because it kind of flies in the opposite of what we've been calling Schrodinger's data. So you remember the sort of the Schrodinger's data when data is pseudonymized.
And it's not?
Yeah, can it be considered personal data? So in this one, we had a cyber attack on DSG systems, and DSG argued it shouldn't be penalized for using the card numbers and the expiry numbers because the hackers didn't have the encryption key to identify the individuals, i.e., whilst it was personal data for DSG, it wasn't personal data when in the hands of the hackers because they didn't have the encryption key, or decryption key, I should say. So the upper tribunal accepted DSG's arguments initially, but in the Court of Appeal, they've rejected it. They've said the DSG sort of recipient-centric view isn't correct. And actually, the key takeaway should be that, if the controller can identify the data, it must secure it, irrelevant, and if that unauthorized third party can identify it or not. The key thing is to secure it, irrelevant whether somebody else could. They kind of say, oh, it's encrypted, therefore we don't have to secure it. No. And I thought that's interesting. So it's still personal data as long as it relates to someone who is identifiable to the data controller, not if it relates to someone who is identifiable to the potential hacker.
So that would be a deviation from the interpretation of the CDU in SRB.
Exactly, yeah.
So this is the first specific meaningful deviation since Brexit, I would say, where interpretation between the UK and the European Union starts to deviate, where the UK takes its own course. And actually not in the business interest, surprisingly.
Yeah, this one is sort of a win for the data subject because it says you have to protect it regardless, no matter who, as long as the controller can identify it, the controller has responsibilities to secure it regardless if anyone else can. So I think that's a real differentiation, which is why I mention it in the context of Schrodinger's data, as I've been calling the CJEU judgment. So yeah, real differentiation.
Very interesting. Back to Europe, a few smaller updates. We have the Swedish Data Protection Authority, EMI, reporting that they saw a 90% increase from 2024 to 25 in reports of personal data incidents that were received. In 2025, they received almost 12,500 reports from data subjects about how their data was processed. So also quite a big increase in their workload. Moving one country to Denmark, the Danish Data Inspectorate has hopefully now finally wrapped up the Chromebook case, giving 51 municipalities serious criticism. For those of you who may not recall, the Chromebook case is about the use of Google Chromebooks in the school system, in especially the primary school system in municipalities, and the other use of Google products for primary school education. And the Danish DPA basically says just relying so much on Google for such an important thing as primary school education is already questionable. The use of sub-processors of personal data outside the European Union for such a vulnerable group of people is questionable. So they still have serious concerns about how this is all happening. A warning has been issued that it is likely a breach of GDPR, and especially the data transfers that they are in breach. So at the same time, the inspectorate emphasizes that any data controller must have access to the necessary resources to ensure the legal processing of personal data, also in situations where a selected product or the contract basis for the product changes. There may be some follow-up required here from the various municipalities to ensure that they are compliant with the law. Similar follow-up is required for some lawyers here in the Netherlands who, surprise, surprise, have been using generative AI to help prepare for their cases. You would think they read the news and maybe learn from their US counterparts, which were actually disbarred for using AI in court cases. No, they have not. And multiple lawyers in the Netherlands have now already received a warning. Some have even been sent on a mandatory AI course, according to the Dean of Lawyers, because they were using ChatGPT or GPT-like programs to help prepare their briefs and submitting those to the court without any additional checks. And the Dean of Lawyers also says this is just really bad that they do this, that they don't check their own work product, even though it sounds very logical. It's actually nonsense in many situations what AI produces. And I would say you would also, if you ask a paralegal to prepare a brief, that's also something that you would verify and check. At least you would hope that the lawyer would do that.
I was actually told when AI first arrived, one of the first things I was told about it is treat it like the dumb office intern. And that's no respect to the office interns, because there are some very clever ones out there.
But also there, you check their work to make sure that they have actually understood and haven't missed anything. And that's also what you should be doing when it comes to artificial intelligence. But yeah, it's some people apparently never learn. And this becomes even more important. I guess also that's why the press release of the Dean of Lawyers went out with Claude AI's new legal add-on, which makes it easier for lawyers to use artificial intelligence, hopefully also increases the quality. But even then, you still need to check. We've said it many times. I'm not going to repeat last week's episode where we talked extensively about agentic AI. I thought this was a remarkable press release. It was really like, you've got to be kidding me. Haven't they learned?
I do actually have one thing to add on agentic AI, and it's so annoying because literally as we finished the episode and pressed publish last week, the Spanish AEPD brought out a piece of guidance around agentic AI that I thought was actually really good. What really caught me about it was not only the key risks that already know, data exposure, autonomy and control, third-party dependency, all of that kind of good stuff, and shadow AI, where if you don't have a corporate version, they'll go and use public ones. But what really struck me about it was the strength of the document was about its focus on the technology. So I think we in data protection world are very good at looking at contracts and policies and DPAAs and things like that. But I've often said what I think we need to be better at is being technologists. If technology is a problem, technology can be the answer. And I've said that in DPAAs, we need to certainly understand security controls and add things like notices and user self-service rights requests as features and functionality within tools. If we can be better at technology, what this Spanish AEPD agentic AI statement looks at is system design choices, architectural safeguards, monitoring mechanisms, logging, access control, isolation of components, as well as human oversight and things like that. And I've often said if technology is the problem, let's also make it the solution.
In short, privacy by design, privacy by default.
Data protection by design and data protection by default, we all should have been doing by now. But I think a lot of data protection people, especially because they come from a legal and risk and compliance background, miss the technical measures and focus on the organizational measures.
Are you now dissing us lawyers?
I am not dissing anyone. I am saying that we all have our areas of comfort and our areas of focus, right? We all have our areas of comfort. And whilst we're talking about AI, the biggest news of today is the joint statement from the GPA's working group. That's the General Privacy Assembly's International Enforcement Cooperation Working Group. about protecting people when you're generating AI imagery. And this is obviously in response to the whole Grok, serious concerns generating realistic images depicting identifiable individuals without their knowledge and consent. And they do acknowledge AI can bring benefits for individuals and society, but it can obviously feature harmful content featuring real individuals, harms to children, vulnerable groups, cyberbullying, exploitation. They bring out a whole load of expectations, and the signatories are pretty much every DPA you can shake a stick at. From Uruguay to the UAE to Slovenia to Norway to Mauritius to Mexico, pretty much any DPA you can think of has actually signed this and they've released it together. And I actually can't think of another time where we've seen the GPA release these kind of statements in this manner.
I can actually.
Okay.
And that was Google Lens. It's a long time ago. I think this must have been 2010 or something like that. But also then there was a global statement from data protection authorities that Google Lens was a dangerous product. And I don't even completely recall what it did, but that was another time when they've done something like that. And I think during COVID, we've seen a similar statement about the track and trace apps that were developed all over the world at the time.
Okay, I stand corrected.
No, that you can't remember doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but it's perfectly fine that you don't remember everything because there are so many of these regulatory statements happening. We can forget every year, every couple of years, one or two.
Actually, what I really love about doing this podcast is it forces you, like, every week to just sit down and go, what's going on? What's been released?
Exactly. What in heaven's name is happening in the world of data protection? One final thing that I have on my list, a seminar I completely missed, but which luckily was recorded and also been released as a podcast, or a summary podcast has been made. The EDPS apparently asks their trainees every year to organize a conference, also known as the Trainees Conference, a platform for young professionals to engage with experts, deepen their understanding of current data protection issues. And together with the Data Protection Board, they organized on the 12th of February, Data Takes Flight, Navigating Privacy at the Airport. And actually, that's a topic that has always fascinated me. I was responsible for the Borders, Travel and Law Enforcement subgroup of the Working Party 29 when I was still at the Dutch GPA. And then we also discussed a lot of travel data. And you can, of course, imagine how making more effective use of imagery and facial scans and passport data can also speed up your way through the airport, and basically the time spent from arriving at the airport and boarding your plane. At the same time, you also know that involves a lot of personal data, that it can be intrusive, that it probably shouldn't be mandatory. There is a security angle there, so it's a good topic for debate. And that's exactly what they did on the 12th of February. They discussed the life cycle of passenger data from booking to boarding, the balance between public security and passengers' right to data protection, influence of technology like biometrics, and also any future implementation of data systems to handle and to protect passenger data. So I think it's actually a very interesting and also probably timely conference. We've discussed before the facial scans that have now been made mandatory at airports across the UK, still optional at many American airports, but also there you're pushed quite a bit to using them. We'll link in the show notes if we forget, which may happen, apologies. You'll find a post on the website of the EDPS, European Data Protection Supervisor, with links to the recording of the conference and the podcasts about it.
We were only talking a couple of weeks ago with Josh from Phase Law and Kay about airports and how you could probably end up with a multi-angle subject access request on cameras if you tried hard enough. And we've been talking about this forever, even from the passenger name records. Most people focus on the GDPR 679 2016, but forget the Law Enforcement Directive and the passenger name records were the next two laws out of the gate. So yeah, passenger name records, immigration, border control. Whilst the EU is sans frontières, I recently had the distinct pleasure of popping into the Netherlands during Carnival And of course, had to deal with airport security in and out in the post-Brexit world. And actually, for the first time going into the EU,
the entry exit system.
Yeah, I had to give my fingerprints on the way in, which has never happened before.
Yeah. I've also already had to apply for the UK variety of ESTA, the electronic travel authorization, to be able to travel to Jersey. I've also had that pleasure. I don't think I had to give fingerprints for that yet, but I'm sure that's on the not too distant horizon.
And next time I come in, I'm sure they'll be waiting with a DNA swab and a rubber glove.
Not if I can help it. But on that note, happy to wrap up this episode. We'll speak to you again next week. Bye for now.
Goodbye. And we'd already finished recording this week's edition of Serious Privacy when, would you believe, by the time we'd stopped recording, we had some extra news. So I've just joined again to add a little addendum to this week's podcast with some more news from the UK. And yeah, big penalties, big penalties. Two of them, in fact, one from Ofcom. Ofcom, for those people who don't know, is the Office for Communications Regulation in the UK. One of which is for 1.35 million for age check failings. Now, this is on a pornography company. Media regulator had fined 8579 LLC's sites for not having age verification for over 18 content, and a further 50,000 for not responding to Ofcom's requests for information. Also adding on this as well, if they don't do it, they will face an additional £1,000 daily penalty. So there's a statement here from Ofcom saying that they've been clear that people require those age verification checks. And if they don't do it, we're going to have additional daily fines creeping up. And this adds to the fine it did in December for another pornography company, AVS Group, for non-compliance with the Online Safety Act for not achieving its goal of protecting minors. Of course, the parent companies are saying that the Online Safety Act doesn't do what it says it's going to do, and also, just diverts traffic away to other darker, more unregulated corners of the internet, and of course, individuals using VPNs as well. Perhaps the bigger one is, and this is again on February the 24th, is for Reddit. Now, most people will be aware of Reddit in terms of being able to add information to Reddit in terms of the subreddits and subthreads. And again, this is for this time from the ICO rather than Ofcom. And this is 14.47 million for not doing a DPAA that involves children, again, and also failure to apply any age assurance mechanisms. Age assurance mechanisms are interesting. We're saying here this time, of course, it's under age 13 rather than under age 18, because it doesn't have a lawful basis for processing the children under the age of 13 and doesn't have any age assurance mechanisms. The quote from John Edwards says, the children haven't had any of their personal information collected in ways they could not understand, consent, or control, which leaves them potentially exposed to content they should not have seen. So there's this focus on age verification again, which I think is always going to be a controversial area of law. And we're also seeing some interesting overlap here between the ICO and Ofcom, which both are issuing penalties in the same area. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this all pans out, especially its effect on children and minors, freedom of speech, online discord, and access to people who want to get the right information and partake in digital society. My personal view, age gating verification is not always effective. And also, when you do hand over age verification information, you're potentially handing that over to other organizations who then have data upon you and can use that for digital surveillance as well. So, a really interesting issue with lots and lots of point of view. And I think it's quite interesting just to add a third party to this, Discord. Discord, for people who know, Discord is another sort of social network for people in the gaming community, especially. Discord has actually announced that its partner organization that it had chosen and did a test for age verification on, they've actually stopped it because they were saying that they didn't like the fact that this age verification or gateway organization was taking data and doing it on their own servers. And they've actually said they're going to stop age gating, stop using facial age estimation, stop doing ID uploads, because they want whoever their chosen partner is to be able to do it on device, so that it happens on device and doesn't send data to anyone else. So there we go. Discord, bit of news from them, an Ofcom fine and an ICO fine. And that's a little bit of an addendum. So thank you very much for your attention. I've been Ralph O'Brien, and thanks for listening.
Now that was serious privacy. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. You can find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Blue Sky as Serious Privacy. Feel free to drop us a question or a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure: non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No, that's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace, so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data, and get credible, cited answers based on NIMBY research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.